The morning was spent finalizing the divorce paperwork, and by the afternoon, my ex-husband took his mistress to buy a Rolls-Royce. My ex-husband said, "It is just $500,000. If you like it, I will buy it." The sales associate looked at him and said, "I am sorry, sir. All three of your cards have been canceled." The waiting room at the Cook County Family Court was strangely cold this morning. It was not the chill of an overworked air conditioning unit, but the coldness of the glances people exchanged when they came here to sign a piece of paper ending a shared life. I sat with my back straight on a gray plastic chair, holding a blue ballpoint pen, the tip resting lightly on the final page of the divorce settlement. On the table, the documents were stacked neatly, as if everything could be folded up compactly, tucked into a drawer, and treated as if it had never existed. But I knew there were scratches that did not exist on paper, but in the heart. Sitting opposite me was Henry, the man I had been married to for 5 years. He crossed his legs, leaned back, and lazily spun a silver Zippo lighter in one hand while holding an unlit cigarette in the other. The look in his eyes was not exactly hatred, nor was it heartbreak. It was the gaze of a man who believed he was winning, the look of someone standing at the top of the stairs, watching a woman about to fall off the step labeled as his wife. He smirked, his voice slow but loud enough for the people waiting nearby to hear. "Once you sign this, Nora, you are no longer Mrs. Sterling. Do not think that after this divorce you are free. There is no one to pay your rent or your utility bills anymore. There is no one to raise you like a child. You are 30 years old, what can you even do? Or are you going to move back to Ohio and rely on your mother?" I did not look up. I simply turned to the exact page that required my signature, pulled the settlement toward me, and placed the tip of the pen right where my name belonged. My hand did not shake. I had done enough shaking during the nights I stayed awake alone, listening to the sound of his car pulling in late, smelling the unfamiliar perfume clinging to his collar, and hearing lies so smooth that a person could only choose to believe them or drive themselves crazy with suspicion. I had chosen a third option. I chose to stay silent, observe, and document. Henry looked at me like I was a worn-out item. He let out a dry, dismissive laugh. "So quiet, do not pretend to be strong. You are too used to living off my money." I signed my name with neat, sharp strokes, not a single line out of place. When I put the pen down, it felt as though a door inside my chest had just slammed shut. It was not the door of love, for that had died a long time ago. It was the door of endurance. I pushed the settlement back across the table to Henry. The paper rustled against the table. It was a small sound, but to me, it sounded like a thick rope snapping. Henry grabbed the pen and signed as quickly as if he were signing a delivery receipt. He tossed the pen down, stood up, and adjusted the lapels of his black tailored suit. The very suit I used to personally iron every Monday morning so he could walk out of the house looking like a boss. He turned his head toward the door, where a young woman was leaning against the wall with her arms crossed. Her makeup was meticulously crafted, making her look as if she had just stepped out of a fashion magazine. Her tight slip dress and high heels made her half a head taller than me. The designer handbag resting on her arm was something I had once stared at for a long time through a boutique window before walking away, convincing myself it was unnecessary. Seeing me, she smiled, a smile as thin as a knife blade. "Are you done, Henry? I still need to go look at cars. Standing around here is a waste of time." Henry walked over and wrapped his arm around hers, his tone shamelessly affectionate. "What is the rush? We are all done." He turned back to look at me, his eyes full of smug satisfaction. "By the way, Nora, I should let you know, I am taking Vicky to pick up a car this afternoon, a Rolls-Royce. It runs about $500,000. You will probably never even touch a steering wheel like that in your entire life." I looked up and stared straight into his face. Not to beg, not to question him. I simply looked at him the way one looks at a stranger telling a hollow story. "Wishing you and Vicky a lifetime of happiness." I spoke slowly and clearly, my voice so calm that even I was surprised. Vicky immediately pouted, tilting her head in mockery. "Oh, you sound so noble. But please stop acting, I can look at you and tell you are bitter." Henry laughed out loud and pulled her toward the exit. Before stepping out, he threw one last sentence at me like throwing mud. "Do not come running back to cling to me when you are struggling. We are completely done." I stood up, folded my copy of the divorce agreement, and slipped it into the inner pocket of my tote bag. My phone screen lit up, displaying a long spreadsheet of numbers, expense categories, wire transfer logs, purchase dates, and amounts of unaccounted money that had left our joint accounts and vanished. I had stayed up countless nights cross-referencing, saving receipts, taking screenshots, requesting bank statements, and gathering evidence like collecting shards of broken glass. For 5 years as a wife, people thought all I knew how to do was cook and clean the house. But there are women who, the more they are looked down upon, the more they learn how to survive in absolute silence. I walked out of the room, down the long hallway leading to the main entrance. The Chicago sunlight spilled across the pale stone floor. I took a deep breath, feeling as though for the first time in years, I was breathing with my own lungs rather than breathing through sheer endurance. Behind me, the click-clack of Vicky's stilettos echoed, followed by her triumphant laughter. "Oh, Henry, I really love that white Phantom. Let us just close the deal today. I want to drive it to dinner tonight." Henry replied with utter confidence. "If you like it, we will buy it. It is just $500,000. Money is just a number to me." I paused for a beat but did not turn my head. I would not let them see my face. Not out of fear, but because I did not want to waste a single facial expression on those two people. I simply reached out and tapped my phone lightly, as if touching a promise. I opened my contacts and found the name I had saved a long time ago. Attorney Lawson. My fingers typed out a short, precise text message. "I have signed. Proceed with the plan." Just a few seconds later, the screen vibrated. "Received. Everything is ready. Just wait for them to walk right into it." I locked my screen and dropped the phone back into my bag. Outside, the traffic was as noisy as ever. Life continued to run at its own pace. I stood under the shade of a tree outside the courthouse, watching the stream of people passing by, and suddenly felt an unusual stillness in my heart. It was not the stillness of sadness, but the stillness of resolve. Henry thought I was walking away from this marriage empty-handed. He thought I was weak, that I was scared, that I would collapse. He had no idea. I had been preparing for this day since the moment I found the lipstick stain on the passenger seat of his car and the hotel receipt hastily stuffed under the floor mat. Every time he lied, I took notes. Every time money disappeared from the joint account, I tracked it. Every time he took what belonged to this family to coax a younger woman, I stayed quiet because I needed him to remain arrogant and careless. I hailed an Uber and opened the door to get in. "Where to?" the driver asked, glancing at me through the rearview mirror. I stated the address as calmly as if I were talking about a routine appointment. "The Rolls-Royce dealership in the Gold Coast." The driver paused for a moment and gave a polite chuckle. "That is all high-end luxury over there. Going to look at cars, ma'am?" I looked out the window, watching the sunlight race across the pavement. Inside me, a small fire had just ignited. Not rushed, not aggressive, but steady and enduring like glowing embers. "Yes, I am going to watch a play." The car rolled forward. I leaned back against the seat and closed my eyes. I could clearly picture Henry's face when he swiped his card, Vicky's eyes when she reached out for the keys, and the exact moment they realized the certainty they thought they possessed was nothing but an illusion. I did not laugh out loud. I just felt my heart beating steadily, as if I were stepping into a brand new life. A life where I was finally the one behind the wheel. The car pulled up to the Rolls-Royce dealership just as the clock ticked past 3 in the afternoon. The tall, expansive glass building gleamed, reflecting the afternoon sun like a massive diamond sitting in the middle of the city. I stepped out, adjusted the strap of my bag, and took a deep breath. The scent of premium leather and the cool blast of air conditioning washed over me the moment the automatic glass doors opened, bringing with it a very distinct aura of luxury. It was a feeling that once made me believe it belonged to a different world, a world not meant for a woman who spent her days worrying about groceries and cooking like the old me. Inside, the showroom was luxuriously quiet. The marble floors gleamed, and crystal chandeliers cast a soft glow. The massive vehicles sat silently, like rare beasts asleep in their enclosures. I slowed my pace, deliberately avoiding drawing any attention. My eyes swept over the cars, but I was actually studying the space, the location of the cashier's desk, the entrances and exits, and the discreet security cameras mounted on the ceiling. I was not here to buy a car. I was here to bear witness. A young, polished sales associate approached me with a professional smile. "Good afternoon, ma'am. Which model would you like to look at today?" I smiled faintly, keeping my voice low. "I am just browsing for now. I might come back to ask for details in a bit." He nodded and politely stepped back. I stopped beside a silver Ghost, took out my phone, and pretended to snap a few pictures. The reflection on my phone screen showed my face, remarkably calm. In my mind, every detail of the plan was crystal clear. I knew Henry would come. He could not resist coming. With his flashy personality, he would choose the most crowded, most expensive place to assert his dominance. And I also knew he would bring Vicky, because she was the exact audience he wanted to impress the most. I did not have to wait long. Less than 10 minutes later, the rapid clicking of high heels echoed from the main entrance, accompanied by a familiar voice I had listened to for 5 years, tracing its journey from gentle to bitter. "See? I told you. This showroom has the best Phantom in the city." Henry walked in, Vicky clinging to his arm. Today, he wore a dark blue suit, crisp white shirt, and a perfectly tied tie. Vicky was dressed in a tight white dress, her hair styled in perfect waves, her makeup flawless. She walked as if she were striding down a red carpet, her eyes scanning the showroom with utter pride. I leaned over slightly, hiding behind the body of the car, just enough so they would not spot me immediately. I wanted to see them in their most confident moment. The sales associate immediately walked over, his demeanor highly respectful. "Good afternoon. Are you here to see the Phantom?" Henry nodded, his voice brimming with confidence. "Yes, my wife loves the white one. Do you have it in stock?" He emphasized the word wife very clearly, as if intentionally poking at the past that had just been signed away that morning. Vicky giggled and leaned into him. "You saying that makes me blush." She glanced around the room and then her eyes locked onto me. For a brief second, surprise flashed across her face before quickly morphing into contempt. She tugged at Henry's arm and whispered, though loud enough for me to hear, "Look, she is here too. Probably just came to look around so she knows what it feels like." Henry turned his head, saw me, froze for a beat, and then laughed. It was the laugh of a man who thought he held all the winning cards. "Nora, you came here too?" I stepped out from behind the car and faced them. "Yes, I wanted to look at some cars too." Vicky smirked, her eyes scanning me from head to toe. "You like Rolls-Royce too? But these models might be a little out of your league, do you not think?" I did not answer her. I simply looked at the sales associate and asked a very casual question. "How is the engine on this Ghost?" Before the associate could even reply, Henry interrupted, his tone incredibly condescending. "She is just asking for fun. Take care of us first. We are closing on the Phantom today." He turned to Vicky, lowering his voice into a pampering tone. "If you like it, we are buying it. It is just $500,000. The sales associate immediately led them to the white Phantom positioned in the center of the showroom. Vicky let out a soft gasp, running her hand along the body of the car in a deliberately exaggerated motion. "It is so beautiful. I love it." Henry nodded, opened his jacket, and pulled out a black leather wallet. He pulled out a black card, placing it into the sales associate's hand as if he were handing over a spare dollar bill. "Swipe this. Pay for it in full." The atmosphere in the room seemed to slow down. A few other clients in the showroom turned their heads to look. $500,000 was not a number people typically dropped on a random afternoon. Vicky stood next to him, her chin held high, her eyes sparkling with absolute satisfaction. I stood a few steps away, leaning lightly against the car, holding my phone. My heart beat at a steady rhythm. No nervousness, no anxiety. I knew what was about to happen. I was simply waiting for the exact moment it revealed itself. The sales associate took the card to the payment counter. Henry crossed his arms, looking completely relaxed. Vicky turned to me and gave a half smile. "See that? There are things you cannot have just because you want them." I looked right at her. "Yes, and there are things that look very solid, but when you touch them, you realize they are completely hollow." Vicky furrowed her brows, and before she could process the words, a dry beep echoed from the payment counter. The sales associate looked down at the terminal screen, then pressed a few buttons to try again. His eyebrows pulled together slightly. Henry frowned. "What is taking so long?" The associate looked up, looking a bit awkward. "Sir, this card is showing a declined transaction." The air in the showroom froze. Vicky snapped her head toward Henry. "What do you mean declined?" Henry gave a forced laugh and waved his hand. "Must be a machine error. Swipe it again." The associate did as told. The screen still flashed the same red text. I stood there feeling like I was watching a movie in slow motion. I knew this was only the prelude. Henry pulled out another card, tossing it onto the counter. "Use this one." This time, the associate was more careful, processing the transaction slowly. Once again, it was declined. Vicky was starting to lose her patience, her voice pitching up. "Henry, what is going on?" Henry did not answer. He pulled out a third card and told him to swipe it. The entire showroom was so quiet I could clearly hear the low hum of the air conditioning. The associate hit confirm, and the screen lit up with the familiar message. "Sir, this card cannot be processed either." Vicky stood frozen. Henry went dead silent for a split second, and then his face flushed dark red. "What?" "Impossible. How can all three cards be declined?" I clearly saw every layer of confidence on Henry's face crumble, piece by piece. I did not step forward. I did not say a word. I just stood there quietly witnessing the moment I had spent months preparing for. This was not the end yet. This was just the first door closing. The entire showroom felt as if someone had turned down the volume. The crystal chandeliers still shined, the marble floors still gleamed, and the multi-million-dollar cars sat in their silent pride. Only the faces of Henry and Vicky were changing, second by second, so obviously that it could not be hidden. I stood not too far from them, phone in hand, my mind as tranquil as a pond where the mud had finally settled. Henry marched quickly toward the payment counter, snatching one of the 3 black cards from the associate's hand. He flipped it over and over, as if doubting his own eyes. Impossible. I just used this card yesterday. The sales associate lowered his head, maintaining his professional tone, though his discomfort was evident. Sir, the system says the cards have been canceled. We cannot authorize the transaction. Vicky, standing beside him, gripped the handles of her handbag so tightly her red-painted nails dug into her palms. Canceled? Who would dare cancel Henry's cards? The question rang out, but no one answered. I knew, and Henry was beginning to understand, even if he did not want to believe it. Around us, the other clients had stopped looking at cars, their curious eyes shifting toward us. Those glances were like tiny needles. They did not hurt immediately, but they pricked slowly, repeatedly into the ego of a man who was used to standing above everyone else. Henry turned to the associate, his voice sharp and aggressive. Run it again. The combined limit on these 3 cards is over $1 million. How could they be canceled? The associate swallowed hard and tapped the terminal again. A moment later, he looked up, his voice lower. Sir, all 3 cards show the same status. They have been canceled by the primary account holder. In that exact moment, I saw Henry freeze. His face turned pale as if all the blood had been drained from his body. Vicky snapped her head to look at him, her eyes filled with panic and anger. The primary account holder? Did you cancel your own cards? Henry shook his head, his voice breaking. No, I did not. I took one step forward, not to draw attention, but to stand in a spot where the lights hit their faces perfectly. I wanted a clearer view. Henry suddenly turned to me, his eyes locking onto mine like a man about to solve a terrifying riddle. Nora, was this you? I looked directly at him. I did not smile, nor did I deny it. I simply asked one very soft question. Do you have proof? That question felt like an invisible slap. Henry opened his mouth but could not formulate a single word. Vicky completely lost her composure, her voice piercing the room. Stop pretending! Who else could it be but you? Whispers started to spread across the room. All 3 black cards canceled. Wow, earlier he said $500,000 was just a number. Talk is cheap. Every single word spoken by the onlookers dropped onto the cold marble floor. Henry clenched his fists, his fingernails digging into his palms until his knuckles turned white. He turned back to the counter, lowering his voice, almost begging now. Is there another way? Wire transfer? The sales associate shook his head. Sir, the bank accounts linked to these cards have also been frozen. Currently, you cannot make payments using any method here. Vicky let out a dry, hysterical laugh, then abruptly went silent. She looked around, realizing too many eyes were on her. The arrogant smile from earlier was gone, replaced by a deep, unconcealed embarrassment. Henry, maybe we should just go home first. Henry did not answer. He stood there like a cracked statue. I could feel this moment burning itself into his memory, like a scar that would follow him for the rest of his life. I walked forward slowly, stopping right in front of them. Looks like today is not the day to buy a car. Vicky turned to me, her voice shaking, but still trying to maintain a tough facade. You are really enjoying this, are you not? I shook my head. No. I am just watching everything return to exactly where it belongs. Henry looked at me, his eyes bloodshot. You did this for revenge. I took a deep breath. No. I did this to protect what belongs to me. No one said anything else. The atmosphere was so heavy that the sales associate did not know whether to stand still or step back. Finally, the showroom manager stepped out, polite but firm. Sir, ma'am, if you are unable to complete the transaction today, I must ask you to leave the showroom so as not to disturb the other clients. That sentence was the final period at the end of the sentence. Vicky kept her head down and pulled on Henry's arm. Let us go. Henry turned back to look at the white phantom one last time, his eyes filled with a mix of regret and suffocating resentment. Then he turned and walked out, his back no longer as straight as it was when he walked in. I stood there and watched them leave. If you are listening to this story right now, please allow me to send a heartfelt request. Please consider liking and subscribing to support me. I wish all the listeners out there an abundance of health and peace. I left the showroom shortly after they did. The afternoon sun had softened, and the wind blew through the trees lining the street. I unlocked my phone, and a new message from Attorney Lawson popped up on the screen. Phase 1 complete. Prepare for Phase 2. I smiled, a very faint smile. This game did not end here. It had only just begun. I walked away from the dealership while the crystal chandeliers still burned brightly behind me, but inside I felt incredibly at peace. It was not the peace of emptiness, but the feeling of watching a long-prepared plan finally lock into its proper orbit. I did not turn back to look at Henry and Vicky again. The moment those 3 black cards were declined was enough to close the curtain on their final act of vanity. The rest of the process did not require an audience. It only required the law. I stepped onto the sidewalk and ordered an Uber. As the car rolled down the street, I opened my phone and scrolled through the neatly organized folders of documents labeled as evidence. Every bank statement, every real estate contract, every wire transfer with vague memo lines. There were nights I sat in front of the screen until my eyes burned, feeling both immense pain and absolute clarity. I used to ask myself why I had to go to such extremes. Then I realized it was not out of spite, but because I refused to walk away from that marriage looking like someone who had been robbed blind. The car stopped in front of an office building on LaSalle Street, where attorney Lawson practiced. I went straight up to the 10th floor, where bright white lights illuminated the hallway. Lawson was already waiting in the conference room, a thick, perfectly aligned stack of files sitting in front of him. He looked at me and nodded. How was the dealership? I sat down and placed my bag on the table, exactly as we predicted. He smiled, not a gloating smile, but the smile of someone who knew everything was moving in the right direction. Those 3 cards were open during the marriage. The initial funding came from your joint accounts. Legally, you had every right to request a freeze upon discovering signs of asset dissipation. I nodded. Henry will not take this quietly. Absolutely not. Attorney Lawson pushed a stack of papers toward me. This is the next step. The petition for a complete asset freeze. The properties under his relatives' names, the car under his mistress's name, the funds wired offshore. We do not need a public screaming match. We just follow the proper legal procedures. I held the file, turning each page. Every line of text felt like peeling back a layer of skin to reveal the true face of the man I once called my husband. How do you think he will react? I asked. Lawson pondered for a second. Panic. Then anger. Then he will try to blame someone else. But in the end, when every exit is blocked, he will have to face it. I signed my name, my pen strokes firm and unwavering. I was no longer the woman terrified of losing her family. That family had been gone for a long time. Today was just the day I finally admitted it to the world. Leaving the law firm, I had barely made it home when my phone vibrated. Henry's name appeared on the screen. I stared at it for a few seconds before answering. Nora, what exactly do you want? His voice lacked the arrogance of the morning and the snapping anger of the showroom. It was hoarse, laced with something that sounded a lot like fear. I want what is mine. You are taking this too far. You took it too far. On the other end of the line, Henry fell silent. I could hear his rapid breathing. Did you really freeze all the accounts? I followed the law. Do you know you are pushing me into a dead end? I watched the long line of traffic outside my window. You pushed me into a dead end a long time ago. I hung up the phone, not out of anger, but because there was nothing left to say. Later that night, I received another text from Lawson. The asset freeze petition has been filed. The judge will review it tomorrow morning. High probability it gets granted. I set my phone down and leaned back into the sofa in my empty apartment. This home used to be filled with laughter and conversation, until it gradually faded into a heavy, oppressive silence. I used to think divorce was the end. Now I understood that divorce was merely the starting line for reclaiming justice. The next morning I was making coffee when the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, I found Henry standing there. His shirt was wrinkled, his tie was askew, and his face was exhausted. Can I come in and talk to you? I stood blocking the doorway. Whatever you have to say it here. Henry swallowed hard. I know I was wrong, but if you freeze all the assets like this, my company will not survive. That money is not just mine. I will pay you back your share. I do not believe in promises anymore. Henry clenched his fists. Do you want to see me dead? I looked right into his eyes. I just want you to take responsibility. He stood in stunned silence for a long time before turning away. His shoulders slumped, entirely stripped of the posture of a successful man. Less than a week later, the news started to spread. Henry's business partners paused their contracts. Banks began reviewing his credit lines. His company was sucked into a vortex of financial audits. I did not need to lift another finger. The system ran itself once the truth was dragged into the light. One afternoon, I ran into Vicky in the courthouse hallway while submitting additional paperwork. She was no longer wearing heavy makeup, nor was she carrying a designer bag. Are you satisfied? I looked at her, feeling neither anger nor pity. You should ask yourself why you ended up standing here. Vicky gave a bitter laugh. He told me everything was fine. I believed him. Trusting someone else's money is always a risk. She lowered her head and walked away in silence. That evening, I received the preliminary court order. The judge had approved the asset freeze, pending the official trial. I read the document over and over, not out of joy, but out of profound relief. It felt as though I was finally standing on solid ground after a long period of stumbling in the dark. I knew the real storm was still ahead. The trial would be the place where everything was laid bare, where Henry could no longer use sweet words or money to hide the truth. But I was not afraid. I had already survived the longest nights of my life. I turned off the light and lay down. In the darkness, I could hear my heartbeat, steady and strong. Tomorrow, the legal war would officially begin. On the morning of the first hearing, the Chicago sky was a pale gray, not raining, but heavy and overcast. I arrived at the courthouse early. My footsteps were slow and deliberate on the worn stone steps. Every step I took felt like walking over the years I had spent suffering in silence. I did not dress up. I wore a simple white blouse and dark trousers. I did not need to make an impression. The truth would speak for me. Attorney Lawson was waiting in the lobby. He nodded when he saw me. "Are you okay?" "I am fine." I was not completely serene, but what I felt was no longer fear. It was sheer focus. I knew there would be words today meant to make me uncomfortable, and glances aimed at pushing me into a position of weakness. I also knew that once I stepped through those doors, there was no turning back. The courtroom doors opened and I walked in. The smell of aged wood and old paper hung in the air. The gallery slowly filled up. On the opposite side, Henry was already seated next to his lawyer. He looked thinner than the last time I saw him. Dark circles framed his eyes, and his suit no longer fit perfectly. When our eyes met, he looked away very quickly. The judge entered, and everyone stood up. As the gavel struck, I suddenly realized this was no longer just a private matter between Henry and me. This was a place where every word spoken carried heavy consequences. The judge opened the proceedings, her voice even and strict. Today, the court will review the plaintiff's petition regarding the determination of marital assets and allegations of illegal asset dissipation. Attorney Lawson stood up and laid out the facts meticulously. Bank statements were projected onto the screen. Purchase agreements for real estate listed under Henry's relatives, all funded by our joint accounts. Massive wire transfers to Vicky's accounts. None of this was done with my consent. These transactions had been happening continuously for 3 years, amounting to hundreds of thousands of dollars. Lawson spoke with absolute certainty. My client has full legal grounds to demand the clawback of these assets. Henry's lawyer stood up to object. My client maintains that these were personal expenditures, not an intentional dissipation of marital assets. The judge looked over at Henry. "Mr. Sterling, do you have a statement?" Henry stood up, placing both hands on the table. "I admit to making the transfers, but that is the money I earned. I have the right to use it." I could hear a slight tremor in his voice on the last word. Lawson immediately produced another document. "Your Honor, I present documentation proving the initial source of funds for Mr. Sterling's assets, which includes Mrs. Sterling's income during the marriage." I looked at the screen and saw familiar numbers. My salary, the savings I contributed to our joint funds, every small deposit swallowed by his massive withdrawals. In the past, I never thought I would need to keep this evidence. But when trust is betrayed, a person learns how to protect themselves. The judge nodded and took notes. "Mr. Sterling, how do you respond to this document?" Henry remained silent. He looked down. The air in the courtroom was suffocating. I could feel the gazes of the people in the gallery. Curiosity, pity, and doubt. I did not care. I only focused on every question and every answer. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up. "I am not asking for anything beyond what the law allows." I spoke slowly. "I only want the assets built during our marriage to be divided fairly. I do not consent to them being used to fund an extramarital affair." The judge looked at me, her expression neutral but attentive. "Do you have proof of the extramarital affair?" Lawson continued the presentation. Hotel receipts, booking histories, text messages. I did not look up at the screen. I had seen them all too many times. Henry's lawyer reacted aggressively. "This evidence violates my client's privacy." The judge banged her gavel. "This is a civil matter regarding marital assets. This evidence directly relates to the motive behind the asset transfers." Admitted. Henry sat down, his shoulders completely slumped. I clearly saw the final mask of his confidence fall away. No excuse was strong enough when the math and the documents stood on my side. The court recessed for a preliminary ruling. Everyone stood up, the courtroom buzzing with whispers. I sat perfectly still, my hands clasped together. I did not pray. I simply reminded myself to breathe. Lawson turned to me. "High probability the judge upholds the freeze." "That is all I need." A few minutes later, the judge returned. The court orders the continuation of the temporary restraining order on the disputed assets, pending a final judgment. The gavel hit the sounding block. I closed my eyes for a second, not out of joy, but because a crushing weight had been lifted off my chest. When the hearing adjourned, Henry walked quickly out into the hallway. I also stood up to leave. Suddenly, he turned around and blocked my path. "Nora, do you really want to push things this far?" I looked right at him. "You are the one who pushed it here." "I was wrong," he spoke rapidly, as if terrified I would not listen. "Give me a chance to fix it." "I gave you plenty of chances," I replied. "You threw them all away." Henry froze, then took a step back. In his eyes, I saw no more arrogance, only absolute powerlessness. I walked out of the courthouse. The sun was high, shining directly onto the plaza. I took a deep breath. I knew this hearing was not the end, but it was a milestone. From here on out, everything would happen in the light. There was no more room for dark corners. I opened my phone and saw a text from Lawson. "Prepare for the next hearing. We are taking this all the way." I locked my screen and walked down the steps. This time, my footsteps felt lighter. After that first hearing, I thought I would have a moment to breathe, but reality did not allow for any hesitation. The machine of consequences was fully operational, and once it started turning, no one could easily stop it. What happened next did not take place in the courtroom, but bled directly into the business world, the arena Henry had always proudly claimed as his own. Just 2 days after court, my phone buzzed incessantly, not from Henry, but from unknown numbers. I did not answer. I knew that when business partners started smelling risk, they would try to confirm it from multiple sources. Silence was my best option right now. Attorney Lawson met me at a familiar coffee shop near his office. I arrived early, chose a secluded table, and ordered an iced black coffee. When he sat down, his face was calm, but his eyes were sharp. "It has started," he said immediately. I figured. One of Henry's major partners just sent a formal notice suspending their contract. They cited the risk from the asset dispute. I stirred my coffee, the ice clinking softly against the glass. "Just one?" Lawson shook his head. "3, and there will be more." I was not surprised. In business, people might tolerate a hot-tempered, ambitious, or even slightly shady partner. But very few will tolerate a man whose assets are frozen, and who is staring down the barrel of a prolonged lawsuit. Money can be made back. Reputation cannot. That afternoon, I received a text from an old acquaintance in the business world who used to work with Henry. "Nora, I heard Henry's camp is in trouble. Are you holding up okay?" I read the text but did not reply. I did not need pity, nor did I need to explain myself. The truth was carving its own path. 2 days later, I accidentally drove past the building where Henry's company was headquartered. I did not want to go there. It was just a traffic detour on my usual route. From the outside, I could see employees walking in and out with tense faces. A few were clustered together, whispering. The air was so heavy you could feel it just by looking at them. That night, Henry called me again. This time, I answered, "Nora, can you tell your lawyer to slow down?" His voice was drained, completely devoid of pride. "Slow down what?" "My partners are pulling out. The banks are calling nonstop. The company cannot survive this. You should talk to your lawyer. You know better than anyone, if this drags out, I will lose everything." I looked out at the balcony, watching the city lights. "Did you think about that when you were wiring our money to someone else?" Henry went dead silent. "I just wanted to save face," he finally whispered. "Face does not keep a company running." I hung up. The next day, Lawson sent me a summary of the situation. A strategic partner had officially terminated their contract. A bank had revoked a credit line. A massive project was indefinitely postponed. One by one, the critical links snapped, causing the empire Henry had painstakingly built to violently shake. I did not feel vindicated. What I felt was a sadness I could not quite name. Sadness for a man who had everything in the palm of his hand, yet traded it all away for ego and greed. One afternoon, I ran into Vicky again. Not by choice, but coincidentally in the hallway of Lawson's law firm. She was huddled on a waiting chair, clutching a worn-out bag, her face gaunt. When she saw me, she jumped to her feet. "You won. Are you happy now?" "I have not won yet. Henry says the company is about to collapse." I looked at her and saw a young girl who was more lost than she was blameworthy. "You should worry about yourself. Have you not done enough?" Her voice trembled. "He lost everything. I am only taking back what is mine." Vicky lowered her head, tears falling to the floor. I did not stay long. Pity helps no one in moments like this. That weekend, I received word from Lawson that a group of minority shareholders in Henry's company had called an emergency meeting. Rumors of the asset dispute and the freeze had panicked them into protecting their investments. When trust vanishes, numbers become meaningless. I remembered the early days when Henry first started the company. I stayed up late with him, editing business plans, encouraging him through the hardest times. I used to believe his success was our family's success, but he never viewed my sacrifices as part of that foundation. That evening, Lawson called me. Henry just offered an out-of-court settlement. He is willing to return a portion of the assets in exchange for lifting the freeze. I gave a dry laugh. Now he wants to negotiate. He is cornered. Please reply for me. I spoke slowly. I do not negotiate. I am waiting for the final judgment. Lawson paused for a beat, then replied, I understand. That night, I lay awake for a long time. Not out of anxiety, but because the memories were flooding back. I remembered the cold dinners I ate waiting for Henry to come home. The times I wiped away tears when he told me, you stay at home, you do not even make any money. I realized the blows dismantling Henry's empire were not coming from me, but from the seeds he had planted over the years. I was merely the one pulling the curtain down. The next morning, I woke up early, brewed coffee, and opened the window. The city woke up just as it always did. Life did not stop because a company was collapsing or a marriage was ending. I understood I could not save Henry, nor did I need to. My only job was to walk forward with my back straight and a clear conscience. I opened my calendar and circled the date for the next court hearing. That would be where everything was decided. After his partners turned their backs, Henry was no longer the man I knew, though the man I knew had been a distorted illusion for a long time. His downfall was not loud like his previous bragging. It happened quietly, layer by layer, like a rotting wall crumbling from the inside. I was not there to witness every moment, but pieces of information trickled down to me through Lawson, old acquaintances, and half-finished text messages Henry would send and then unsend. One morning, while organizing files for the next hearing, Lawson called. His voice was lower than usual, carrying a new intensity. We found a new development. What is it? We received an anonymous tip regarding Henry hiding debt and running a shell corporation. My hand froze. A shell corporation? Yes. An LLC under an associate's name, used to funnel money from contracts his main company could not legally attach its name to because of liability. I closed my eyes for a second. I had suspected something before, but I never had hard proof. Does it tie into the marital assets? Lawson answered decisively. Yes. The initial seed money came directly from your joint account. I let out a slow breath. Every time I thought Henry had hit rock bottom, he proved he could dig deeper. That afternoon, Henry showed up at my door unannounced. When I opened it, I saw a man who was shockingly thin, his eyes sunken, his face covered in rough stubble. The man who once stood in a luxury car dealership declaring money was just a number now looked like he had barely survived a hurricane. Nora, I need to talk to you. We have nothing to say to each other. Yes, we do, he said, his voice raspy. I need you. I blocked the door. You need your lawyer. Henry let out a dry, hollow laugh. What lawyer? Everyone abandoned me. I looked at him. I did not feel angry. I did not feel pity. I only felt complete alienation. Come in, I said after a moment of hesitation. Not because my heart softened, but because I wanted to hear him out, so I could sever ties completely. We sat across from each other in the living room. No tea, no water, just heavy silence. Did you know? Henry started. I took out hard money loans. I am not surprised. How much? A lot. For what? To keep the company breathing a little longer, to keep people from laughing at me. I looked right into his eyes. You are more afraid of being laughed at than you were of losing your family. Henry looked down. I thought I had it under control. You never had it under control, I said softly, but every word was a razor. Henry looked up, his eyes red. Nora, I am begging you, drop the lawsuit. I will pay everything back. With what money? Henry fell silent. I stood up. This conversation is over. Henry shot up, his voice frantic. You do not understand. If this shell company gets dragged into the light, I will face massive fraud charges. You should have thought of that before you did it. Henry stared at me like I was a total stranger. You have changed. I am just no longer blind. Henry left in silence. When the door clicked shut, I stood still for a very long time. I was not happy. I did not feel victorious. I just felt a deep, profound exhaustion. There are secrets that, when exposed, do not bring liberation. They only leave an empty void. A few days later, I was summoned to court for a supplemental deposition. The new documents were submitted. The Shell Corporation, the undisclosed private loans, the hastily signed contracts. Henry had run out of ways to cover his tracks. Every exposed secret pulled another brick from a foundation that was already collapsing. During the deposition, the judge looked at me sternly. Were you aware of these activities during the marriage? I did not know. I answered directly. If I had known, I would not have let things go this far. Lawson added, my client was not involved in, nor did she benefit from any of these activities. The judge made a note. I knew the line between victim and accomplice was sometimes very thin, and I was lucky I had chosen to stand on the side of transparency before it was too late. The news spread faster than I expected. In the tight-knit business community, Henry's Shell Corporation became the main topic of gossip. The people who once admired him now only shook their heads. That internal collapse was far more painful than any court ruling. Late one night, I received a text from an unknown number. Nora, it is Vicky. I stared at the screen for a few seconds before replying. What do you want? Henry owes me money. I am not handling his debts. I know, the text appeared slowly. I just wanted to say he conned me too. I did not text back. There are truths everyone has to face on their own. I could not carry the consequences of someone else's choices. That night, I sat alone by the window. The city below was still bright. I thought about the secrets that had just been dragged into the light, and I realized they did not just expose Henry. They exposed the woman I was years ago. A woman who had closed her eyes to too many red flags. But I no longer blamed myself. Waking up always comes with a price. The next morning, Lawson sent me the updated schedule. The upcoming hearing will be critical. These new developments will heavily influence the final judgment. I texted back. I am ready. I knew Henry's internal empire had already crumbled. The rest was just procedure. And when the final secrets were laid bare, there was nothing left to save an empire built entirely on lies. On the day of the final hearing, the Chicago sky was unusually bleak. I arrived at the courthouse very early, not out of nerves, but because I wanted a moment of quiet to steady myself. Outside the courthouse, the crowd was bustling, every person carrying their own story, their own anxiety. I stood there, took a deep breath, and walked inside. Attorney Lawson was waiting in the corridor. He nodded at me, his eyes serious but unwavering. Today is the end, he said. I know. We sat down in the plaintiff's row. Shortly after, Henry appeared. He walked slowly, his shoulders weighed down as if carrying a boulder. His once perfectly tailored suit now hung loosely on a gaunt frame. When his eyes met mine, I did not look away, nor did I look at him with defiance. I simply looked at him the way one looks at someone who was once very familiar, but is now a complete stranger. The hearing began. The judge went through the docket, her voice even, but every sentence struck like a hammer in the already tense room. The new documents were introduced. The money trails, the shell companies under other names, the hidden hard money loans. Every detail read aloud was another layer of a mask being ripped off. Henry's lawyer attempted to argue. My client acted under severe duress and immense pressure from his business operations. The judge cut him off. Pressure is not a legal justification for violating fiduciary duties and marital obligations. Henry lowered his head. I could see his hands trembling slightly on the table. When it was my turn, I was asked, Mrs. Sterling, do you have any additional requests? I stood up. In that moment, I could feel my heart beat clearly, but my voice remained calm. I only asked the court to review the facts and protect my legal rights under the law. Nothing more. The judge nodded and took notes. Lawson stood up and added decisively, my client did not participate in, consent to, or benefit from any of these illegal transactions. The asset freeze and the redistribution are necessary to ensure equity. The air in the courtroom was suffocating. I could feel Henry's eyes glancing toward me periodically, as if he wanted to say something but held back. There are things that, by this point, are too late to be said. Following the presentations, the judge allowed both parties a final statement before recessing to make her ruling. Henry's lawyer asked for a moment for his client. Henry stood up, his voice raspy and low. I admit I was wrong, but I asked the court for a chance to start over. The room was silent. The judge asked, do you have anything to say to the plaintiff? Henry turned to me. Nora, I am sorry. Just 3 words. No tears, no begging. I looked at him, feeling no massive waves in my heart. I acknowledge your apology, I said. But an apology does not replace accountability. Henry closed his eyes. The court recessed. I sat perfectly still, my hands resting in my lap. Old images flashed through my mind. The dinners I waited for him, the times I convinced myself everything would be fine. But all of that was just memory now, carrying no weight. Lawson leaned in close. Whatever the outcome, you did the right thing. I do not need anyone to validate that anymore, I replied. The wait felt incredibly long. When the judge returned, the entire room stood. I could hear my own heart, not out of fear, but because this moment marked the end of a chapter in my life. The judge read the ruling. Every word rang out clearly. The asset freeze is upheld. All marital assets illegally transferred during the marriage must be fully reimbursed. Miss Sterling's financial violations and alleged fraud will be referred to the proper regulatory authorities for further investigation. Henry stood frozen. When the ruling was read, he looked like a man who had lost his entire sense of direction. The hearing concluded, and people slowly filed out. I was packing my documents when Henry called out softly. "Nora." I stopped. "I know I have no right to say anything," he continued. "But I want you to know. I never thought it would end up like this." "Neither did I replied. "But it did. Do you ever regret it?" I thought for a few seconds. "No. My only regret is that I did not wake up sooner." Henry nodded, his eyes red but tearless. We left the courtroom in opposite directions. Stepping outside, the midday sun hit the steps, bright but warm. I paused for a moment, taking a deep breath, letting the air of freedom fill my lungs. Lawson caught up with me. "Everything is settled." "I know," I said. "Thank you for everything. Your road ahead will be a lot lighter." I smiled. On the drive home, traffic was dense, horns honking all around. The city kept running as if a marriage had not just shattered and a business empire had not just crumbled. I realized the world does not revolve around anyone's pain, and that is a good thing. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, leaving the window open to let the breeze in. I no longer thought much about Henry, his company, or the judgments of others. I thought about myself, about how I was going to live after all the doors were finally closed. I understood that the final confrontation in the courtroom was not just the end of a legal case. It was the starting point of a completely different life. A life where I no longer had to bow my head, no longer had to wait for someone to come home, and no longer had to doubt my own worth. The day I received the official finalized judgment, I was sitting in my new small office, the morning sun slanting through the glass window, painting my desk in a peaceful pale yellow. My phone buzzed. It was Attorney Lawson. I picked up, and before I could speak, his voice came through clearly and decisively. "The judgment is officially in effect." I stayed silent for a few seconds. "Exactly as we expected?" "Yes. All marital assets that were illegally dissipated must be reimbursed. The asset freeze remains active until the judgment is fully executed. Henry's financial liabilities are being forwarded to the authorities." I closed my eyes. Not out of overwhelming emotion, but because I felt a very distinct lightness in my chest. An invisible weight that had dragged behind me for months was finally set down. "Thank you," I said. "No need to thank me. This is your legal right." When the call ended, I sat still for a long time. I did not cry, nor did I cheer. Instead, there was a deep silence inside me, like the surface of a lake after a massive storm. I realized there are victories that do not bring jubilant celebration, only a necessary conclusion. That afternoon, I received a text from Henry. Just one short sentence. "I lost." I stared at the text and did not reply. Not out of contempt, but out of understanding. No words mattered anymore. Winning or losing, right or wrong, it had all been defined by the law. The rest was a burden each person had to carry themselves. A few days later, I heard the news that Henry's company had officially shut down. Employees quit. Partners sent letters demanding liquidation of their contracts. The hard money lenders began tightening the noose. Henry, a man who used to stand in the center of luxurious banquets, was now facing the naked reality of a total collapse. I did not go out of my way to seek more information. I did not want to turn someone else's pain into gossip to satisfy curiosity. For me, that story had reached its final chapter. One evening while organizing my apartment, I accidentally found an old notebook filled with my scattered thoughts from the first few years of my marriage. The handwriting was naive, full of hope and trust. Reading it, I felt a mix of pity and amusement for myself. The woman in that notebook used to think that if she just tried hard enough and loved deep enough, everything would be okay. I closed the notebook. I did not throw it away. I kept it as a piece of the past, a reminder that I had survived those days. A week after the final judgment, I met Vicky again. She had reached out and asked to meet at a small coffee shop. When I arrived, she was already sitting there, her face haggard, dark circles under her eyes. "I am sorry for bothering you," Vicky said quietly. "What is it?" "I have been legally ordered to return everything I received." She looked down. "I do not know how I am going to do it." I looked at her and saw none of the arrogance from before, only a lost young woman facing the consequences of a terrible choice. "That is a legal liability," I said. "You should find a lawyer." Vicky nodded, tears hitting the table. "I just thought that if I attached myself to a successful man, my life would change." "Life does not have shortcuts," I replied. We did not say much else. The meeting was not a reconciliation, nor was it a chance to scold her. It was simply a quiet period at the end of the final thread connecting us. On the way home, I thought a lot. I realized that shattering does not just happen in marriages like mine, but in the illusions of so many people. The illusion of money, status, and the belief that you can lean on someone else to live an easier life. That night, I sat in front of my computer screen, watching the words of my own story form. I did not write to complain, nor to parade a victory. I wrote to remind people that anyone can end up in my situation if they place their trust in the wrong hands and forget their own value. If you are listening to this right now, please allow me to say something very sincere. If you connect with this story, please consider liking and subscribing to support the channel. I wish you all health and peace. Your support is not just motivation for these stories to be told. It helps them reach people who might need to wake up before it is too late. After everything, the lesson I took away was not bitterness, but clarity. I understood that the law could help me get my assets back, but only I could help myself get my life back. I started planning for the days ahead. A new job, a new rhythm of life, no one to control my spending, no one to look down on my efforts. I made all the decisions myself, right down to the smallest details. There were nights I still suddenly thought of Henry, not with resentment, but with a distant feeling. I used to love that man. That was true, but I did not love the man he became, and I no longer needed to. The complete shattering of that life turned out to be exactly what I needed to be reborn. If it had not happened, I might still be living in a hollow marriage, lying to myself by calling it a family. After the judgment became official, my life did not suddenly become brilliant and effortless, like people often imagine. There were no fireworks. No one stood up to toast my victory. Everything happened quietly, even feeling a bit empty. When a marriage is terminated by law, what you lose is not just a husband, but a way of life, a rhythm that had stretched over years. In the early days, I woke up very early. Even though there was no one to cook breakfast for and no one to wait for, I still brewed coffee, opened the window, and sat watching the traffic outside. But unlike before, I no longer felt like I was being left behind. I knew every morning I woke up for myself, not to shoulder a role for someone else. I began cleaning my apartment, not to erase Henry's presence, but to reorganize myself. The clothes he left behind were boxed up and hauled away by a donation service. The shared items were thrown out, except for what I genuinely needed. Every time I set an object down, it felt like setting down an old memory, a heavy burden. Someone asked me, "Why not sell the place and move so you do not have to remember?" I just smiled. I am not running from memories anymore. This is where I lived, where I hurt, where I woke up. I stay here not to reminisce, but to remind myself that I survived my darkest days in this exact place. I dove into my new work with a seriousness I had never possessed before. In the past, even when I worked, I treated it as secondary because my mind was always on my family, my husband. Now, work became my mental pillar. I took on extra projects, proactively expanded my network, and learned new skills I had abandoned because I was too busy taking care of someone else. Some nights I came home very late, physically exhausted but mentally weightless. I realized that being tired from fighting for yourself is completely different from being drained by a relationship that is no longer fair. One afternoon, I met with Attorney Lawson to finalize the last pieces of paperwork. When I finished signing, he looked at me and smiled faintly. "You are doing better than I expected." I did not have any other choice but to do better. No. He shook his head. "You are doing better because you accepted the truth." That sentence stayed with me the whole drive home. Accepting the truth. It sounds simple, but it is something many people fail to do. Some people would rather live in familiar pain than face a truth that forces them to change. I used to be like that. I used to invent endless excuses for Henry, for that marriage. I used to think, if I just endure a little longer, maybe things will change. But the truth is, there are no maybes for someone who is used to looking down on you. In the following days, I spent more time with my family. I visited my mother in Ohio frequently, cooked with her, and listened to her tell old stories. She never asked me about Henry, and she never blamed me. Only once, while I was washing dishes, she stood next to me and said very softly, "You have lost weight." "I am fine, Mom." "Fine is good," she replied. "But do not force yourself to act too strong." I turned my head away, tears falling before I even realized it. There are sentences that require no explanation yet hit the softest part of your heart. I also started getting used to evenings alone. No loud TV, no arguments, no waiting. I read books, listened to music, or sometimes just sat in silence. At first, it felt hollow, but gradually, I realized this quietness was not scary. It was the space I needed to finally hear my own voice, something I had neglected for years. Once, a friend asked me, "If you could go back, would you still marry Henry?" I thought for a very long time before answering, yes. My friend's eyes went wide. After everything he did? Yes, I said. Because if it were not for that marriage, I would not be the person I am today. I do not view my past suffering as a meaningless mistake. It was a lesson, the price I had to pay for my naivety. The important thing is that I learned it, and I will not repeat it. I also started observing the people around me more closely. I realized so many women are living in marriages just like my own. They stay silent, endure, and convince themselves they are doing it for the kids, for the family, to save face. But deep down, they are exhausted and lonely. I do not advise anyone to get a divorce. I do not have that right. But I believe everyone deserves to be respected. Everyone deserves to live up to their own value. If a relationship only makes you shrink, makes you weaker, makes you more afraid every day, then it is no longer a place you should stay. There are nights I still dream of Henry. In the dreams, he is not evil, nor is he bitter. He is just a tired, lost man. I wake up, and my heart no longer aches like it used to. I understand it is just residual memory, not a sign of regret. My road ahead is still long. I do not know who I will meet or how I will live in 5 or 10 years. But this time, I am not afraid of uncertainty, because I have stood at rock bottom, and I know I can climb back up on my own. I write these words not to praise my own strength, but to remind myself that rebirth is not a single moment. It is a process. Every day I choose to live a little differently, a little more honest with my emotions, a little kinder to myself. And I know my story does not end here. It is only halfway through. Following the initial days of a shattered life, when the emptiness began to settle, I started to feel a very slow but obvious change inside myself. It was not the radiant happiness people often describe post-divorce. It was a state of being completely awake and grounded, much like a person recovering from a severe illness who finally learns to appreciate a normal breath. I realized I had lived in the role of Henry's wife for far too long. Every decision, every thought revolved around him. Whether he was happy or sad today, whether his business was thriving or failing, it all dictated my mood. I used to believe that was love. Looking back, I realized it was dependency cleverly disguised. Without Henry beside me, I was forced to learn how to ask myself questions I had never asked before. What do I like? How do I want to live? What do I expect from the future? At first, those questions made me stumble. I realized I was so used to answering for someone else that I forgot how to answer for myself. I started with the smallest things. I changed my daily schedule. I no longer forced myself to wake up early just to make someone else's breakfast. Some days I slept in. Some nights I stayed up late reading. I ate the food I liked without worrying if someone else would enjoy it. Those seemingly trivial things were my first steps in taking back my personal freedom. I enrolled in a short-term project management course, something I had wanted to do years ago, but Henry deemed unnecessary. You just need to take care of the house, that is enough. Sitting in a classroom among people younger than me, I did not feel out of place. Instead, I felt like a piece of my old self was coming back to life. The woman who had dreams and ambitions before she was shrunk down by marriage. There were evenings I went out to eat alone. The feeling was strange at first. I sat in a crowded restaurant surrounded by couples and families. I used to fear people's judgment. But then I realized no one actually cared about me as much as I thought. Everyone was busy with their own lives. When that thought clicked, I felt incredibly relieved. I also learned how to handle curious questions from acquaintances. How are you? Are you okay after the divorce? Do you have any regrets? Initially, I stumbled, trying to give answers that would satisfy the person asking. Later, I just smiled. I am fine, and I am learning to live better. No explanations, no justifications. I no longer felt the need to prove I was right or wrong to anyone. One afternoon, I ran into an old friend who knew me before I was married. We sat and talked for a long time. Mid-conversation, my friend looked at me and said, "You are very different now." Different how? Lighter. You do not look like you are constantly bracing for impact anymore. That comment made me quiet. I did not realize my own transformation until someone else pointed it out. I understood I was stepping into the light. Not the light of success or fame, but the light of internal freedom. I started writing more. Not to complain, but to organize my thoughts. There were nights I wrote about old fears, about the feeling of being disrespected and abandoned. There were nights I wrote about very small hopes, like where I would get coffee tomorrow or where I would go this weekend. Writing helped me face myself honestly. No judgment, no evasion. Gradually, I realized I was no longer angry when I thought of Henry. I no longer compared my current life to whatever he was going through. I was no longer waiting for remorse or a delayed apology. If those feelings existed, they were fleeting. I learned that forgiveness is not for the other person. It is for yourself. Forgiveness does not mean forgetting or accepting what happened. Forgiveness is the decision to stop letting the past control your present. One thing became abundantly clear during this time. No one can save you if you do not want to save yourself. I used to wait for Henry to change, wait for the marriage to get better, wait for a day when everything would naturally fix itself. But life does not work that way. Every change requires a decision, and that decision can only come from you. I also redefined what it meant to be strong. I used to think being strong meant enduring, staying silent, not complaining. Now I understand that being strong means daring to admit you are hurt, daring to walk away when you are no longer respected, and daring to start over even when nothing is guaranteed. There are days I am still sad, I do not deny it. But the sadness no longer drowns me. It just reminds me that I am human, and then it passes. I no longer punish myself for feeling it. One morning, standing in front of the mirror, I suddenly realized my eyes looked different. There was no more hesitation, no more feeling like I needed permission to be myself. I smiled at my reflection, a light but very real smile. I knew the journey ahead would have challenges. Living for yourself is not always easy. It demands that you take full responsibility for your choices. No blaming, no leaning on others. But I was ready. Stepping into the light does not mean forgetting the dark. It means you have looked straight into it, understood it, and decided never to let it swallow you again. And after everything, I am learning to live as a complete human being. Not someone's shadow, and not a supporting character in someone else's life. I used to think that after the judgment was finalized, after Henry and the old marriage were permanently sealed away, the past would rest quietly in some distant corner, completely disconnected from my present life. But I was wrong. The past does not vanish just because we want it to. It only sleeps until it finds an opportunity to knock on your door and see if you are truly strong enough. That morning, I was getting ready to leave the apartment when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. Looking through the peephole, my heart stopped for a second. It was Henry. No more tailored suits, no more posture of a man who stood above the world. He wore an old button-down shirt, wrinkled pants, his face gaunt, his eyes exhausted. I stood still for a few seconds. In the past, just seeing his silhouette would make my chest tighten. But today, the only emotion I felt was a calm, guarded peace. I opened the door. "Why are you here?" Henry looked at me, his lips trembling as if he wanted to say 1,000 things, but all that came out was a quiet question. "Can I come in and talk?" "No," I answered immediately. "Whatever you have to say it here." Henry looked down. "I do not have anyone left to talk to." If this were a few months ago, that sentence might have softened me. But now, I only saw it as the inevitable consequence of everything he had done. "Just say it," I told him. Henry took a deep breath. "I have to sell the house I am living in. Too much debt." "I know. I wanted to ask you for a favor." I stared straight at him. "What do you want?" "I want to borrow some money, just to survive this stretch." The air froze for a few seconds. I looked at Henry, not with anger, but with genuine shock. I could not believe that after everything that had happened, he could still stand in front of my door and ask that question. "You actually think I would lend you money?" Henry looked up, his eyes begging. "I know I have no right, but I have no other choice." I shook my head. "You are wrong. You do have a choice, and that is taking responsibility for your own life. Do you hate me that much?" "I do not hate you," I answered, my voice steady. "But I am no longer going to shoulder the consequences for you." Henry went quiet. I saw something in his eyes that looked very much like terror. Perhaps for the first time in his life, he truly understood what it meant to have no safety net. "Nora," Henry's voice shook. "I have lost everything. I lost everything once too," I replied. "But I did not come knocking on your door." Henry stood there for a very long time before finally nodding. "I understand." He turned away and walked slowly down the hall. I closed the door and leaned my back against the wood. My heart was beating faster than normal, but not out of fear. It was the feeling of someone who had just passed the ultimate test against their past. I sat down on the chair and took a few deep breaths. I realized that if I lent him money today, even just once, I would be dragging myself right back into the old mud. Not because of the money, but because of boundaries. Once a boundary is broken, it is incredibly hard to build back up. In the days that followed, I heard a few scattered updates about Henry. The company was officially dissolved. Hard money lenders were circling. Old friends were avoiding him. I did not dig for information, but the news found its way to me as a reminder that life is always fair in its own unique way. One afternoon, I visited my mom. I told her about Henry showing up at my door. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said one soft sentence. "You did the right thing." Was I too cruel, Mom? She looked at me, her eyes kind but firm. "No. You were just protecting yourself." That sentence made my heart soften. I realized so many people, especially women, are taught that they must be forgiving, they must sacrifice, they must think of others first. But very few teach us that protecting yourself is not selfish. That night, I wrote for a long time. I wrote about the moment I opened the door and saw Henry, about the feeling of my heart beating fast but not trembling. I knew I had truly changed. Not because I had become cold, but because I had learned to set boundaries. Some people only appear in your life to teach you a lesson. Once the lesson is over, they have no more role to play. Trying to hold on only brings pain to both sides. I wondered if the past ever returned in a different shape. Would I still be as clear-headed as I was today? But then I smiled. I do not need to know the future. What matters is that I have the internal strength to face it, no matter how it arrives. In the following days, I continued living my rhythm. Work was progressing well, and I was given new responsibilities. The relationships around me slowly shifted. I became more selective. I did not trust as easily, but I did not lock my heart away either. I learned to balance caution and openness. Sometimes I asked myself if I still believed in love. I did not have an immediate answer, but I knew that if I loved again, I would not love in fear. I would not love in endurance. I would love on the condition that I never lost myself again. When the past knocked on my door, I opened it, looked it in the eye, and closed it. No panic, no resentment, just the simple understanding that it no longer had a place in my present life. And that was the moment I knew I had truly stepped into a new chapter. After Henry knocked on my door and left, I felt as if an invisible door inside me had also closed. Not the door of hatred, but the door of entanglement. Without the past pulling me back, I started to see the road ahead much clearer. A road I never dared to imagine before, let alone walk on. I realized that for years, I had lived far too safely. Safe in familiar choices, safe in a marriage that was suffocating but outwardly stable, safe in a job I never dared to excel at because I was afraid of hurting my husband's ego. Now, with all those constraints gone, freedom was both alluring and terrifying. One morning, I received an invitation to join a new project from a former associate. A massive project with heavy challenges, meaning I would have to dedicate a lot of time and accept high risks. In the past, I would have certainly declined, or at least agonized over it for weeks. But this time, I only thought about it for one night. The next morning, I said yes. When I hit send on the confirmation email, my hands shook slightly. Not because I feared failure, but because I knew this was the first time I was choosing a path entirely for myself, not for anyone else. The work pulled me into a new cycle. Long meetings, blunt debates, the pressure to make fast and accurate decisions. I was tired, but it was a very different kind of tired. I was tired because I was living up to my potential, not tired because I was trying to please someone else. One evening, I sat alone in my office late at night, watching the city lights reflect off the glass windows across the street. I suddenly thought, if I were still in that old marriage, I would probably be rushing home right now to make dinner, worrying if Henry was in a good mood. Thinking about that, I felt no regret. I only felt gratitude that I had the courage to walk out. The new path did not just open up in my career, but in how I viewed relationships. I no longer sought external validation. I was no longer afraid of being labeled too strong or too independent. I understood those labels only appear when people feel they cannot control you. I met new people, not with the intention of finding a romantic relationship, but simply to expand my world. There were fascinating conversations. There were people who gave me a positive perspective on life. I learned that when you are no longer emotionally starved, you do not desperately grab onto anyone just to fill a void. During a get-together with friends, someone asked me, "Are you planning on dating again?" I laughed. I am not planning anything. If it happens, it happens. That answer surprised even me. In the past, I always needed a plan, a guarantee. Now I accepted uncertainty, meaning I would not lose myself in it. I also started doing things I previously considered luxuries: a solo weekend trip, an evening yoga class, an art exhibit I loved but Henry once called useless. Those small choices added up to a very different life. There were times I still felt scared, afraid of failing, afraid of being lonely, afraid I had gone too far and could not turn back. But I learned to accept fear as part of the journey. I did not let it stop me. I understood that only those who are moving forward have a reason to be afraid. Those who stand still do not. One night, while cleaning out old emails, I found a draft I wrote to Henry but never sent. In it, I begged him to spend time with the family. I begged him to listen to me. I read it, and then I deleted it. Not out of spite, but because I was no longer that woman. I also realized this new path demanded I take full responsibility for my life. No one to blame, no one to lean on. If I failed, it was on me. If I succeeded, it was also on me. That feeling was both heavy and liberating. There was one thing I never dared to think about before, the fact that I could live happily without having to play the perfect role in someone else's eyes. My happiness now was very simple. A quiet morning, a productive workday, an evening where I could just be myself. I know not everyone has the opportunity or the means to change their lives as clearly as I did, but I believe anyone can start by simply listening to themselves a little more. The new road I am walking is not covered in roses, but it is the road I chose with my own feet and my own will, and that alone is enough to make me walk firmer every single day. Looking back, I no longer ask what if. I only ask what is next. That question opens up endless possibilities instead of trapping me in regret. I know my journey is not over. There are challenges ahead, forks in the road I cannot see yet. But this time, I am not hiding. I am ready to face them, because I have learned the most important thing, to believe in myself. On a very ordinary morning, I sat by the window, my coffee cooling in my hand, watching the sunlight spill across the buildings downtown. Nothing special happened that day, no important calls, no surprise text, just a moment of pure silence. And exactly in that moment, I understood something I had gotten completely wrong before. Freedom does not come from cutting ties with a relationship. It does not come from winning back assets or winning a lawsuit. Freedom comes from the moment you no longer have to betray yourself just to stay in someone else's life. I looked back at everything I had gone through, no longer with blame or regret, but like watching a long movie. In that movie, I was a woman who tried everything to hold on to a family she believed was worth it. I stayed silent at the red flags of betrayal. I told myself if I were just a little better, a little more patient, everything would be fine. I confused love with endurance. Now, standing here, I do not criticize the woman I used to be. I understand why she made those choices. She was afraid of loss, afraid of brokenness, afraid of what people would say. She believed saving the marriage at all costs was a success. But in doing so, she traded herself away. I realized true freedom began the exact second I dared to admit I was unhappy. Not everyone has the courage to name their pain. Many choose denial because facing the truth means having to change, and change is always terrifying. For a long time, I thought freedom meant having no one controlling me, but now I understand the thing controlling me the most was not Henry, it was my own fear. The fear of being abandoned, the fear of not being good enough, the fear of starting over. When I carried those fears, it did not matter where I was never free. Freedom to me now means having the right to say no without explaining. It means having the right to choose to stay or leave without feeling guilty. It is being able to look in the mirror and not have to ask if I pleased anyone today. I remembered standing in that luxury dealership, watching those 3 black cards decline, watching Henry's face collapse. I thought that was the climax of the story. But now I know the real climax was not him losing face or losing money. The real climax was when I no longer trembled before the power he used to represent. I looked back at the trial, the stressful days, the moments facing the law and the truth. I used to think I had to win to move forward. But the truth is, even if the verdict had not been in my favor, I still had to walk away. Freedom does not wait for anyone's permission, not even the law. The law only helped protect my assets, but the decision to live differently was mine alone. Some people ask me, after everything, do I still believe in marriage? I do not answer immediately, because I know that question is not as important as another one. Do I still believe in myself? And the answer now is yes. When you believe in yourself, you do not need to cling to any traditional mold to feel safe. I also understand that freedom does not mean loneliness. It just means you no longer accept any relationship that forces you to shrink. If one day I enter a new relationship, it will be because I want to share my life, not because I need someone to fill a void. Looking at Henry, I have no resentment. I do not even want him to feel remorse. Everyone has their own path, and he is paying the price for his choices. I used to think, if he had changed sooner, if he had appreciated me more, things would be different. But life does not run on ifs. It runs on what happened. And what happened is that I woke up. One thing I am incredibly grateful for is that I did not let the pain turn me into a bitter person. I do not need revenge to feel valuable. I do not need to prove who was right and who was wrong to feel like I exist. I just need to live a life where I wake up every morning without having to wear a mask. True freedom is also accepting that I am not perfect. I can be weak, I can be sad, I can be scared, but I no longer run from those emotions. I allow myself to be human, with all my light and dark shades. I look at the women around me, women still trapped in loveless marriages, in relationships reduced to mere obligation. I do not judge them. I only hope that one day, they will find the courage to ask themselves a very simple question. Am I living my own life? The answer might terrify them, but it is a necessary fear. because only when you are afraid do you realize you are standing in front of an important door. That morning, I finished my cold coffee. I stood up to prepare for a normal workday, but inside, I felt it very clearly. I was living, not just existing. And that is true freedom. As I write the final words of this story, it is late at night. The city is much quieter than during the day, with only a few streetlights casting a glow onto the empty roads. I sit at my desk, no longer feeling the heaviness I felt during the first days of putting pen to paper. Instead, there is a strange calmness, like when someone finishes a very long journey, looks back, and knows for sure they will never walk in those old tracks again. From the outside, my story might look like a familiar marital tragedy. A cheating husband, a calculated divorce, a prolonged legal battle, a woman standing up for justice. But to me, the essence of it was never just about right and wrong between two people. It was my journey from blindness to awakening, from dependency to autonomy, from terror to peace. I used to think the greatest loss of my life was a broken marriage. But standing at this finish line, I realized the greatest loss was not losing a man. It was the fact that I almost lost myself if I had stayed. No one teaches us that some marriages cannot be saved, not because you did not try hard enough, but because the effort was only coming from one side. I also used to think being strong meant biting the bullet, staying quiet to keep the peace, and sacrificing to earn the title of a good wife. Now I understand that true strength is daring to look the truth in the eye, the truth that you are not happy, and daring to walk away even when the future is completely uncertain. Many might ask, if I could choose again, would I change the past? My answer is no. I do not want to erase what happened because those exact events built the person I am today. If I had never loved wrong, I would not know how to love right. If I had never lost myself, I would not know how to value myself this much. Throughout this journey, I learned one crucial lesson. No one is responsible for saving you except yourself. Others can give advice, offer encouragement, or even extend a helping hand. But the final decision always rests with you. When you choose to stay in a relationship that hurts you, that is your choice. And when you choose to walk away and take responsibility for your life, that is also your choice. I am not writing this to advise anyone to get a divorce, nor to cheer for broken families. I understand every family has unique circumstances, and everyone has a different threshold for pain. The only thing I want to say is, do not use endurance as a metric for love, and do not use sacrifice as an excuse to deny your own pain. There are women out there just like the old me, telling themselves to just hold on a little longer. For the kids, for the family, for appearances, I do not dismiss those reasons. But I hope, before you sacrifice yourself one more time, you ask yourself a very honest question. If I keep living like this for another 5 or 10 years, will I even recognize myself? Life is not as long as we think. And youth, no matter what age you are, never comes around twice. You do not have to become a strong woman according to anyone else's standards. You just need to be a woman who does not betray herself. I also learned that money, status, and a glamorous facade are never guarantees of happiness. The only true guarantee is respect. When someone no longer respects you, all their promises, all their assets, all their financial support are just window dressing. And when you stop respecting yourself, you will accept things you never should have accepted. I walked out of that marriage not with the mindset of a winner, but of a survivor, surviving the long nights of self-doubt, surviving the moments of wondering if I was a terrible wife, surviving the days of being belittled while forcing a smile. And precisely because I survived, I truly understand the value of a peaceful life. Now, my days pass by very normally. I work, I rest, I see my friends, I take care of my family. No drama, no climax. But in that normalcy, I get to be myself. I no longer have to brace myself to prove anything to anyone. I just need to live right, live kind, and live without shame. I know this story will eventually come to an end, but the lessons within it will not. They will follow me for the rest of my life, reminding me that whenever I feel small, I still have the right to stand up straight and say no to anything that hurts me. I wrote this story not to badmouth a man, nor to brag about a delayed awakening. I wrote it to distill a lesson that can be applied to life. The lesson to love yourself before you love anyone else. Learn to be independent, not just financially, but emotionally. Trust your intuition, because it is usually more accurate than you think. And most importantly, do not stay in a place just because you are afraid to start over. Starting over is not nearly as terrifying as living a life that is not yours. If this story helps someone out there pause for a moment to think, to look back at their life, and to be a little braver with their own truth, then writing it down was entirely worth it. Life gets better when every person knows how to protect their own worth, respects themselves, and through that, learns to respect others. The story of a shattered marriage, betrayal, divorce, And the rebirth of the woman in this piece is not just a life story, but a profound lesson on self-worth, awakening in relationships, and life itself. Through the journey of facing the truth, fighting a legal battle, and learning to live for herself, the story sends a message that everyone deserves a life of peace, freedom, and respect. If you are exhausted in your marriage or feeling stuck in life, remember that you always have the right to choose your path again, starting from a place of absolute clarity and self-love.